Hi Pranav, welcome to the Network Capital podcast. Through this, we try and do a deeper dive into the mental models of people's careers. So, could you tell us who you are and what you do?
Hi Utkarsh, my name is Pranav Kothari. I work at Educational Initiatives. Our mission is to create a world where children are learning with understanding. The problem that we are trying to tackle is rote learning because that's the biggest elephant in the room. We do this by making high quality assessments that check for conceptual understanding, whether a child has really understood a concept or has simply memorized facts and procedures. We also make these assessments to measure student learning when it comes to impact evaluations of the work that NGOs do. We have MindSpark, which is a personalized adaptive learning software that is used in more than 300 government schools in 8 states of India now.
And how did your interest in education come about?
So I was a MBA student at Harvard Business School, and on campus there was a lot of inspiration that came from a variety of different social enterprise quarters. There were professors, peers, students who were in teaching or had worked in school systems before that I interacted with. We had case studies of various entrepreneurs in education. While I was sitting in the midst of all of this, Professor Clay Christensen asked a question, which is, what is the purpose of your life? He has subsequently written a book on this. And that question really haunted me for the time I was there. I would spend an hour reflecting on that question every evening. And as I did more of that reflection, I found that, I had the privilege of going to some of the best schools and colleges. I went to St. Xavier's Loyola, then studied at Georgia Tech, and finally at Harvard Business School. And it's not because I was very smart or intelligent only. I had the right form of support. Someone gave the right advice, someone, paid for it, someone gave the emotional support for it. And in many ways, it didn't make sense to pay them back. They didn't really need it. So I thought the best use of my education would be to pay it forward, to be the support system for others who have a great education. And during those 2 years, I explored multiple things ranging from starting a preschool in South Bombay, becoming an MBA professor at colleges, and finally decided that the value of primary education in a child's life is sort of what would make the highest difference. And that's when I decided that I would actually spend a fair amount of the next part of my career being the support system for those who don't have access to a great education.
What were you doing pre-Harvard Business School?
So after finishing engineering, I joined the Boston Consulting Group as a management consultant. I got to travel the world. I spent 2 months in South America, in Chile and Argentina. I spent another 2 months in Germany, spent a year and a half in the US working for a variety of consumer goods and industrial goods in consulting. And then for 2 years, I was in private equity. The first year was in New York and the second year in Mumbai. We looked at a variety of deals ranging from healthcare to aviation. And those were the 4 years that I worked before doing an MBA.
So your career really shifted, right? Most people want different kind of, or seek different kind of goals post an MBA. Why did it happen? Like, did you go in thinking that education or something social would be where you'll end up?
I actually went into business school wanting to become a hedge fund manager. And, I even made fun of the Social Enterprise Club in the first semester. So it's something that I did not go in thinking about or not even having the exposure to doing. It's essentially time on campus. I actually had the fortune of going to business school after working in consulting and private equity. During my undergrad, I'd also interned at General Electric and Capital One. So I had, the luxury of having been there, done that. But I didn't feel that the work that I was doing was meaningfully improving people's lives, at least not directly. There was a lot of intermediaries. It was very hard to attribute it back. And during those 2 years, through variety of different inspiration from cases to random coffee chats, I decided that what I wanted to do was really be able to work in the trenches, get my hands dirty and do something that directly, felt like improving someone's life.
And who did you consult with while making this choice?
I got a lot of free advice from classmates. I had offers to go back to BCG and private equity. If I did that, they would have paid for my entire tuition. A lot of people told me that, why don't you, finish that off, like be financially stable before you do this. I actually thought the opposite. I thought that, let me go and do this first. In case I fail, in case, I'm on the streets and don't have enough food, I can always go back and pursue that path. So I actually got no advice from people to say, it's easy to say, follow your dreams, follow your passion. But I think when it comes to practical living and financials and paying off the loan, I don't think anyone out there, could say that by working in Indian education and social development, you'd be able to do that. I sort of did this, and a lot of people would say it wasn't the right logical decision. But I felt that I had enough of a safety net to be able to go back and do what they were saying.
Right.
No, not much advice, except, there were people who at least told me about this world and about these different things that one could do.
Yeah. Why did you go to business school?
So,
Hedge
at
fund
some
was,
point,
of course, one reason, and getting into an HBS would be helpful. But I'm sure there were other reasons.
Utkarsh, what happens is, you follow a template, right? You do engineering, you do consulting, you do private equity. Everybody tells you that you have to do business school. In fact, the companies that I worked for required me to go do an MBA and come back. I don't think there was a lot of active thought at that point. So you're just following the template. You're following a blueprint that has existed, is socially acceptable, is something that sounds safe. I don't think I spent too much time thinking before applying.
It just seemed like the natural progression. And with the wisdom that you have today, when did you graduate?
2011.
So 8 years out, do you think that MBA was precious, valuable to you?
So a lot has changed since I applied for an MBA in 2008, right? The two reasons that people used to go to an MBA are, one is to gain knowledge and the second is to get a network. The access to knowledge is no longer confined to the MBA program. You can get a lot of online courses, that you can do and get access to that knowledge. Now, there is some merit in having that network, but that is if you go to the top schools, right? So my advice, if someone were to do an MBA, is to go to the very top, the top 5, the top 10, wherever they think they can get in. It's actually not that useful to go to a second-tier MBA college because the biggest cost is the 2 years that one would lose out where they could be working, where they could be contributing, where they could be advancing their career. So I would say if you get into a top 5 MBA college globally, it might be worth it because the quality of the professors and your peers and the events on campus would be, a significant notch above than the others.
You spoke about the Professor Clayton Christensen's words, having a strong impact on you. Absolutely. Tell us more about today, the work that you do. Do you apply some of the lessons that you picked up, or do you draw upon your network actively from business school? If yes, how? If not, why not?
So it's hard to make that one-on-one correlation, right? I'm sure that the 500 cases that I was exposed to at HBS, the active decision-making that happened while I was in the classroom, it's all of that, brick and cement that is at the foundation of what I do. But if you were to tell me what did you learn and how are you using it, I think it's more subconscious.
Of course.
It's also about what you take out of business school, right? I've had friends who essentially, didn't do as much work and coasted through business school, and it probably had a lesser impact on them. And I've had friends who, took every opportunity, attended every event, and read every case, and came prepared to class. And it would definitely have a positive impact. So it's not just about what the MBA gives you, it's also what about you take from the MBA. And to do this very thoughtfully. So in my second year, I didn't make a resume because I knew I wanted to go back and help improve education. I think what I used that time then is to go visit charter schools. I would spend morning to afternoon there. I would interview all the teachers, the founder, and took lots of notes. I went to events. I went to on-college activities and seminars that were designed to that. So I think you need to be articulate on what you want out of the MBA, and then a lot of your time on campus would be much better utilized.
Yeah. Let's discuss a little bit of your pre-MBA days and why, how did you decide to apply to HBS and how did you prepare? So, of course, you had a very perfect looking resume, Georgia Tech, BCG, the private equity fund. HBS seemed like the natural next step. But are there some things that you did well in your application and your interview that you'd like to share with our audience?
So first is, I applied only to Harvard and Stanford. Now, this may seem elitist to sound, but it's in line with what I said previously, that if you get into the very top, it's worth going. And if you don't, it's not worth going. So in my mind, I knew that if I didn't get into both of these, I would just continue working and apply the next year. For me, I think what worked well is having a unified story. As to why I studied engineering, why I sort of worked in the Fortune 500 companies, the consulting and the private equity, and what I wanted to do after HBS. So I think college applications look for that unifying storyline. If you're doing too many scattered things, and in your application you write that after the MBA I'm going to do yet another unlinked thing, I think that doesn't seem like a cohesive application. Obviously I asked around other people who had gotten into business school, asked what worked for them, what didn't. I was fortunate to have a very high GPA, but above average GMAT score. And I think those two sort of balanced each other out.
So what was your GPA and do you remember your GMAT?
Yeah, so my GPA was 3.9 out of 4, which at Georgia Tech I was amongst the top 2% of all the engineering graduates at that time. My GMAT score was a very low 690, which I think is maybe about the 80th percentile.
Right. And together it came together, plus your work experience added up. Why did you decide to take up management consulting after doing so well in engineering?
So I got an opportunity to spend my summers working during my 4-year undergrad. The first internship was on the factory floor assembly line of General Electric in Louisville, Kentucky. I had to work with union employees who were 50 years old. I was only 19 at that time. I got a really good hands-on experience on how a factory floor looks like. In my second internship, I was a corporate buyer. So we would buy millions of dollars worth of capital equipment, and I would be responsible for sourcing, negotiating, closing those deals. In my third internship at Capital One, we actually used to mail out physical 2 billion pieces of mail in the US, and so even just process optimization. What happened during those 4 years of learning and 3 summers of internship is I realized I love the business side of things far more than the engineering side of things. This is also 2004, just a couple of years after September 11, 2001, and a lot of the US companies had stopped accepting foreign applications because the whole H-1B visa would just take so much longer. BCG was amongst the few companies that was still willing to accept foreign nationals. I had 2 other offers from Capital One as well as from National Instruments. And between those 3 offers, I liked the BCG one most, given what I had experienced during my internships.
And again, private equity after consulting is something that is sort of in the template, but was there any other reason why you chose private equity, or did private equity choose you?
So actually, after finishing 2 years of BCG, they expect you to go to business school and come back. But I wasn't ready for business school then. I wasn't sure which business school, why now. One thing I knew for sure is I'd never taken an accounting class. And even at BCG, even in management consulting, I used to struggle with the finance and the accounting side of things. So instead of going to college to learn those, I thought that if I joined a venture capital or private equity, I would get to learn it on the job. And that also gave me 2 more years of working before I went to business school. In hindsight, I think it was a good decision. All in all, with my internships and this, I walked into business school after 5 years of working. And the first year, a lot of the basic courses was a breeze because that's what I had done. And it also allowed me to close doors on what I didn't want to do. So I knew getting into business school, multiple things that I wouldn't do. And that just helped me be more focused in business school. And so anyone out there who's thinking about an MBA, I would recommend that run as many experiments as you can, do as many internships, do as many jobs as you can before business school, so that when you get into business school, you are far more sharper about what you're looking for. And it's also a good reset button when you want to do a career change.
Tell me, how different was your day at BCG when you compare it to your, say, an average day at the private equity firm?
So I think one big difference is client service versus being on the buy side. So in client service, I think you have deadlines that are on a weekly basis. You are expected to make very highly polished slides that convey what you want to say effectively. There's a fair bit of travel to the client side, and normally cases run between 2 to 6 months. On the private equity side, it's more of evaluating deals that come in. The pyramid is inverted. So, for example, at BCG, there would be about 4 to 5 associates and consultants reporting to one project manager, and then 4 to 5 project managers reporting to one partner. In the private equity shop that I was, we had 3 partners, 2 managers, and me as a single associate. So in some ways, I had 5 different bosses. The work at private equity involves typically lesser travel, more sort of looking at the financials of companies, and it sort of has to think about what might be potential acquisitions, exits, multiples, comps. Whereas the work in BCG would be more around logic and interviews of a different kind.
So now, when you compare it to your day at EI, with what you just described, what has changed? What has remained the same, or is it completely a new ball game?
I think what has remained the same is logical thinking, right? Problem solving. Looking at the same problem with multiple diverse perspectives. I think those are things that you have to do in consulting, in private equity, in edtech, in social development. I think what has changed for me the most is finding purpose in the work I do. I work harder now in social development than I did at BCG in private equity, and that might sound crazy. But the one difference is that there I worked because it was in the atmosphere, because there was pressure from the manager, there were deadlines, it was external, extrinsic motivation to do that. I think in the work I do now, there's a very high degree of intrinsic motivation. I feel a lot more satisfaction in the work I do. I go to sleep sort of knowing that, I'm proud of what I do. This might sound self-serving, but it does provide the fuel for continuity. Before business school, the maximum I'd worked in any job was 2 years. After business school, in this space, I've stuck at it for the last 8 years.
So this was your first job and is your job today after?
Yeah, I think I'm one of the rare few MBA grads. In the last 8 years, I've not changed a single job. This is my first job out of business school. And a large part of that is the satisfaction, the ability to see the work through, the ability to see cycles, right? I think when you work for 2 years, you might just see the peak or the trough of a sine curve, and you might just form mental models that, everything is rosy or everything doesn't work. But when you're at something for 8 years, you see the full sine curve. So you become a lot more balanced. You also know the counterfactual really well. So one example is, we started these Mindspark centers in Delhi. They were doing really well. They were very well subscribed. We even got, high quality impact evaluation. But we ran out of funding because we were very high cost per child. And then we had to shut the centers down. And for the next 2 years, I was not able to raise funding to bring this to government schools. And then we finally got this, and now we're in multiple government schools. So does technology work? Does technology not work? Is it expensive? Is it cheap? Can teachers change? Can they not? I have a far more balanced view of the world because I've seen the highs and lows of one thing. And I think that is very undervalued. You get oil when you dig in one place for hundreds of feet, right? If you drill in multiple locations for tens of feet, you may not get what you're looking for. So one of the things that really surprises me when I look at a lot of people who come to interview is that they have multiple 2-year experiences. They have changed jobs every 2 years. And a lot of their worldview is based on the experience they've had. And so one advice that I normally give is stick to something for the long haul. Take time. Like it took me 8 months after business school to find what I'm doing.
Tell us more about that process.
So, I graduated from HBS with a romantic dream of helping low-income students and being a support system for them for a better education. But I didn't know the specifics. Is it through teacher training? Is it through public policy advocacy? Is it through technology? Is it through curriculum? My chase was to find the most efficient way to do this because, efficiency generally scales. So the equation is, output over input, which is learning outcomes delivered per unit dollar spent or unit time taken. And I didn't know what the right theory of change would be to do this. So I actually used my, HBS email address and wrote cold to people. I wrote to everybody that I could. Whoever replied back, I spent 2 days at their office by taking the train down. Now, in this journey, my only quest was to find out what works, what doesn't, and see what India is already doing. Now, this was a painful 8 months, right? Because I had the HBS loan, I had a wife, parents are asking, what are you going to do next? But what I told myself is I'm finding what I want to do. And that's what I did for 8 months. I was just thinking, experiencing, being on the ground, meeting people, attending conferences, until I finally sort of found a group of people, an organization, a theory of change that I resonated with. And I think in some ways, taking that time out up front has allowed me to stick longer because I know what else is out there. And I think that's another thing that I would recommend, that people take ample time, maybe 2, 3, 4 months, to really explore everything as much in detail as possible before picking something. The chances that your anchor is going to go deeper is much higher when you have scoped out a lot of the surface on where you want to drop the anchor.
It's such precious advice. Pick carefully, stick diligently. What have been some satisfying moments? There have been many, but true moments that stand out in your 8-year journey with EI, and what have been some hard parts?
I think the most satisfying has been the direct connection with the children who I serve. I remember this, when I first helped a child, learn how to use a mouse, to use Mindspark, I almost felt like an electric current that sort of went through my body. When I came back 6 months later, this child was actually very proficient in some advanced mathematical concepts. And I think this may seem like one child, one story, but I think it sticks with you. And I think, just going back again and again to the classroom, seeing what the counterfactual is, seeing if I wasn't here, what the life of these children would be, is something, are some of the highs. On the lows, I think, fighting the battle on outcomes versus outputs is sometimes harder. I think there's so much that goes around by way of photographs and videos, and people just saying all the right things, but ultimately the impact on outcomes is sometimes undervalued, right? So if you look at the governments, they're talking about infrastructure. If you talk about, just there's so much noise out there that gets a lot of attention, gets a lot of the capital, that I think fighting the battle on learning outcomes has been much harder, much more than I thought would be necessary. But I guess, some of us think about this logically, and I think one has to also understand there's a lot of emotion that surrounds this. And I think that's been one of the things that I'm still grappling with.
Right. Do you think if you were to give one advice to the edtech entrepreneurs and one advice to the government policymakers, what would it be? And I understand this is just your personal understanding of the subject, but you've been here in this industry for a while. We'd love to hear.
I think for the ed tech entrepreneurs, focus on the ed, focus on the pedagogy, focus on what is it that, what is the research base that you are building your technology on. I think so far the focus has been more on technology and maybe on gamification, right? So does my software have enough engagement? Does it have enough bells and whistles? Does it have enough adrenaline rushing, reward points, etc.? And much, much lesser on the research base on how a child would learn fractions or how a child would learn how to read a passage. Understanding that, education has always been a better medicine, right? We remember that, it was challenging to learn some of the things in biology or mathematics or some of those things. Yes, there are teachers who bring joy. Yes, there are students who are naturally talented for it. But education is a better medicine. And so just recognizing that, yes, you are trying to sugarcoat with all of the bells and whistles, but deep down, what is that chemical compound that is going to guarantee children to learn? That is very undervalued, right? And so I would recommend that every edtech entrepreneur spend far greater time on the pedagogy side of things and then using technology to deliver it effectively. On the government policy side, I would encourage them to consider small experiments. See, today, if you are a principal secretary of a large state, you have 40,000, 60,000. A state like Rajasthan has 80,000. A state like Madhya Pradesh has 100,000 schools. Given that the scarcest resource is the IS officer's time, the tendency is to do all or nothing. So if you go, if you don't have a solution for all 100,000 schools, they are not really interested in knowing more. But I think allowing experiments at 100 schools, at 1,000 schools, to create that proof of concept, to entertain those, measure them rigorously, is very important before one decides to scale. Generally, all people believe that what's the big deal in having, teaching third grade students how to read and do basic math? It seems so trivially simple. It can't be rocket science. And I tell them, it isn't rocket science. Rocket science is much simpler. We have landed a man on the moon, we've sent a mission to Mars, but we still don't have a distilled way of ensuring that every child who enters the classroom is able to read in their mother tongue language, right? And so allowing and recognizing that far more fundamental research needs to be done, a lot more R&D, a lot more pilots, a lot more prototypes need to be done, measuring the impact of all of these on learning outcomes, and then thinking about scale is the right way to go about this.
This has been such a fascinating conversation, Pranav. Thank you so much for your time. Your insights will reach about 100,000 subscribers who are waiting to learn more about consulting, private equity, thinking through business school, and most importantly, finding purpose at work. So thank you for your time. We truly value it.